Hello, everybody. This is Doug Reeves, broadcasting from chilly Boston, Massachusetts. Greetings to my friends in the United States and around the world. I'm very happy to share with you today's webinar on the 90-90-90 Schools Revisited. This is surely one of the most widely quoted pieces of research in education over the last 2 decades. But the question, as always, is, what have you done for me lately? And so I'm going to give you the brief history of the 90-90-90 school research, but also give you some updates for 2019 that I think you'll find useful as well. As always, I put my contact information down here. Those of you who know me know I'm very rigorous about responding to your questions individually. That's why I have my Twitter handle at Douglas Reeves, my personal telephone 781-710-9633, and our website creativeleadership.net. That's creativeleadership.net, where you can find the handouts for today's webinar, as well as the audio and video recordings of past webinars. As soon as it's prepared, I'll also make the video recording of this webinar available. And finally, if you and your colleagues would like to have this presentation at your school, all you have to do is ask us, and we're happy to share this. We've provided this all over the world and certainly would love to learn more about the needs of your system and how this research might apply to you. So a couple of other things that I want to make clear before we go on. It's okay to stop anytime with questions. You can just use the question function on the webinar and I'll respond. You can also use the chat function if you prefer. I may not be able to get to every question because we have a very large group of participants on today's webinar, but I promise you that I respond one-to-one to every single inquiry that you send. So you'll always have the opportunity to do that, as well as using the question function on today's webinar. I also want to give you my personal invitation to come to the Creative Leadership Summit. That will be in Boston when I promise it will be warmer in June than it is now, June 26th, 27th, and 28th in downtown Boston. You can register at creativeleadership.net/events. That's creativeleadership.net/events. We have got an all-star cast. You'll have leaders from not only some of the best schools in the United States here, Dr. Jennifer Price, one of the top independent school leaders in the world, Mr. Roger Leone, the new superintendent of Newark, New Jersey, one of the most important turnaround stories in American urban education, Dr. Chip Kimball, who is coming from Singapore, having done some amazing work there with innovative work. And what you'll find is symmetry. The great school systems are great school systems, whether they're in the United States or abroad, whether they're independent or whether they're public schools, whether they have high poverty or low poverty. You'll hear great ideas from a variety of presenters, including, of course, my colleagues at Creative Leadership Solutions as well. So I'm really looking forward to having you join us there. Please go to creativeleadership.net/events if you're interested in participating in the 2019 Leadership Summit. Please register. It'll be a small group, only about 200 people. So we're looking forward to closing that as quickly as we can. I also wanted to offer some free resources that I've recently created. I wrote an article for Ed Leadership called Restoring the Teacher Pipeline and the Profession. Here are the facts that I think are deeply disturbing. The pipeline, that is the number of people being prepared to become teachers, compared to the number of demands for not only replacing those who are retired, but just filling the pipeline of those who decide to quit teaching. That pipeline is down 35% this year. It's down more than 50% in places like Michigan and California. In Oklahoma, that's truly the canary in the coal mine. A single district is able to absorb every single qualified new teacher candidate in the state. And the train wreck we have ahead of us is a bunch of emergency credentialed people who have not been prepared for the challenges of your classrooms. And what's more, as you know better than I, oftentimes those new people are thrown into some of the most challenging classrooms. So in this article, that's a free download at creativeleadership.net, I provide 7 ideas for how you can restore the pipeline and the profession. And I'll just tell you, money's part of it. You can't have 6-figure debt and a 5-figure income, but money is only number 7. There's other things, including working conditions, autonomy, respect, RESPECT, that we've got to have to be able to keep people in our profession and attract more to them. Next, supercharged cabinet meetings. This is an article particularly designed for superintendents and cabinet officers to help you make better use of the most precious resource you've got, and that is your time. Next generation accountability. I wrote with the late Dr. Becky Dufour on how we can use the new Every Student Succeeds Act, ESSA, to create really meaningful accountability systems. Becky and I believe that you can have accountability not as a gotcha system, but as a learning system. And busting myths about grading. This is from the allthingsplc.info journal, and it is really important because a lot of people persist in believing things about grading that just aren't true. Next, we make available to you the Leadership Performance Matrix, a great way to develop and assess leaders, as well as identifying who might want to be your next generation of leaders. Again, it's a free download used in many states right now, based on a 36-state study that we conducted. And of course, all the slides from today's presentations. One more free resource I just want to offer because I've spent some time in the last 2 days on this, and that is if you're working on your doctoral dissertation, or you know somebody who is, send them to finishthedissertation.org. It's free, it's non-commercial, and it's necessary because 69% of doctoral candidates never finish. And our goal is to help you get across the finish line, and that's what we've done with students literally around the world. Started in a church basement in Boston, we now have students on every continent, and we're committed to help you and your colleagues and your loved ones who are stuck on their dissertation get unstuck and finish. So let's get to today's topic. The original research on the 90-90-90 schools had to do with schools that were 90% of students qualifying for free and reduced lunch, 90% members of ethnic minorities, and 90% meeting or exceeding state standards. And what was great about this research is that we were able to control all the variables that people normally associate with student achievement. Because we were looking at more than 130 schools, it all had the same per pupil funding, the same teacher contract, the same administrator and teacher assignment policies, the same neighborhoods. All these things were identical. The only things that were different were professional practices. And if we learned anything from this and the other research that I'll tell you about today, it was practices, not programs. This is not about something you've got to buy. It's about what we as professionals do. And once you've got practices, not programs fixed, it empowers you to make changes in a very short period of time. Now, I've later replicated this, looking at more than 2,000 schools, and also have included international comparisons. And what we really looked for also was sustainability over the course of 5 years. I think it's important also that I acknowledge other researchers in this field, although I was early in the game 2 decades ago, starting in the research of high poverty, high performing schools. I absolutely want to acknowledge the work of, for example, Education Trust. You can find their work at edtrust.org and look at their Dispelling the Myth site. I want to honor Karen Chenoweth. That's Karin Chenoweth. You can find a number of her books published by Harvard Ed Press, starting with the It's Being Done series. And most recently, last year, she published Schools That Succeed. And what she has been able to do is to look at schools that were not flashes in the pan, but persisted in their achievement over the course of time. Heather Zadofsky, in her wonderful book, Bringing School Reform to Scale, also has noted that this is not just about individual heroic teachers and individual heroic principals in individual schools. It's about systems that are able to perform over the course of time. So here are the original conclusions from the research, and I'll share with you how that's been sustained over the course of time. First of all, a laser-like focus on student achievement. And every time I do school visits, as recently as the last few weeks, I see more and more examples of what that looks like when every meeting, every professional learning opportunity, every casual conversation, every faculty meeting, every grade level meeting, every professional learning community meeting is focused on student achievement. What I call the trophy case effect. You want to know what your school culture is like? You can take a survey if you want to, but I'm not sure that this survey is about climate and culture or telling us all that we need to know, when you can simply walk into a school and see what's on the wall. And if all you see in the wall is athletic trophies and everybody talks a good game about student achievement, trust me, the students are looking at the trophy case. By contrast, in 90-90-90 schools, when I look in the trophy case, I've seen great student essays, wonderful artwork, student musical compositions, student mathematical, elegant problem solvings, lab reports. I saw a middle school this year that had every single student with handwritten goals in the trophy case. It shows you what the culture of a school really values. And yes, I believe in athletics too. I believe in extracurricular activities. If you need to build some more trophy cases, do it, because there's room for academic achievement there also. Nonfiction writing. One of the most consistent research findings is that the high poverty, low performing schools were doing writing, sure enough, but there was an awful lot of fantasy, fiction, haikus, and the high performing schools with the same demographics were writing to describe, writing to persuade, writing to compare. They engaged in argumentative writing. And one of the great things that many of your schools and states have done in the last couple of years is to emphasize a more appropriate balance. But it's not what I saw in a lot of the low performing schools that I observed. In fact, there was a 90-to-1, that's 90-to-1 ratio of fiction over nonfiction. Whereas in the high-performing schools with the same demographics, it was a better balance. Yes, there's a room for fiction and narrative and poetry, but also writing to describe, writing to persuade, writing to compare. Collaborative scoring. I just finished a chapter on this for a new book that's coming out next year that's really an update of the 90-90-90 schools. And one of the things that I noticed in collaborative scoring is that although it's hard to do, and frankly people resist it, there are two wonderful things that occur. Number one, when teachers collaborate for scoring, the quality of their work, that is the level of agreement, gets higher and higher and higher. The first time you try collaborative scoring, I guarantee you that there will be a lot of people who will disagree. But the more you do it, the more agreement there will be. In addition, when you do more collaborative scoring, it gets faster and faster. And that's the sort of thing that I think really appeals to teachers, because the most constant complaint that I hear is we need to save time. Finally, these schools had what I've called power standards. They know, just as everybody listening today knows, that we can't do it all. We've got to focus on a few things and do them well. Not 55 math standards in sixth grade, but maybe 6 or 7 that we got done well. And I'll just tell you, I know low math scores are a problem around the United States. Nobody is flunking a middle school state math test because they don't know about the trapezoid and the rhombus. A lot of them are flunking because they don't know fraction and decimal operations and fundamental number operations of adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing. If we're not clear about what power standards are, then we can have teachers buried in trying to cover everything, and as a result, having students know nothing. So let's talk about what's new. Since the original research is published, I've shifted some of my research to look at what we've called the fourth 90. That is not only 90% poverty, 90% minority, 90% meeting or exceeding standards. What about 90% English language learners? I have been so impressed in the last few weeks and months of having the opportunity to work with some great teachers in California and elsewhere, where a very substantial number of students are not speaking English at home, and yet they continue to build the quality of their achievement in school with English language tests. I've seen more and more schools analyze the cause of failure. And this is something you can do right now. This is being broadcast in December of 2018. It's the end of the first semester of the 2018-19 school year for many people. And as that comes up, before you award any D's and F's, make a pie chart. Ask yourself, what's the cause of the D's and F's? And I know some of it may be attendance, some of it may be discipline. I'll bet you dinner anywhere, 90% is missing work. And if that's the cause of failure, that's something we can do something about. And they share interventions, but they're shifting the interventions away from after school and Saturday school to interventions during the school day. Hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars have been spent on after school, on Saturday school, but the kids who most need it don't show up. Indeed, teachers and administrators with after-school programs are telling me the kids who are coming to that are the B students who want to get an A, not the failing students who need to pull their grades up to C's and B's. So they're shifting their interventions to during the school day to get it done. And finally, they're documenting the link between achievement and behavior. A lot of people have this exactly backwards. They think, well, once I get this class under control and behavior gets better, then I can focus on achievement. That is backwards. When you reduce the DF rate, it is a law of the universe. More success, fewer failures, less hopelessness, less futility. Then you have more students actively engaged with positive behavior in the classroom. So these are new things that I think are really important findings that I've been learning from you and from your colleagues. So here's some other new evidence from 2018. I'm working with high schools where failures are down dramatically. And you might think that when failures are down, that would mean that their interventions would be way up. Exactly the opposite happened, because they figured out that high school students and adolescents generally respond to incentives rather than punishments. And when they had fewer failures, they were able to intervene less frequently because kids figured out, if I get my work squared away, I've got more time, and they value freedom. Middle school, dramatic reductions in absences, suspensions, and failures. At the elementary school, absences down by more than 90%, or more than 80% rather, proficiency up 30% in a single year. And mind you, they did not change students, teachers' curriculum. You made the difference in your professional practices. So what's the magic formula? It's all about practices, not programs. The immediate same day or same week intervention for academic support. They did not wait until a progress report. They did not wait until the end of the semester. They did it every single day. In fact, when it came to attendance, they intervened the same minute of the day. One principal called it the 60-second report. And 60 seconds after the tardy bell rang, people had a stand-up meeting in his office to call every single student, not robocalls, real persons calling real residences in the first 15 or 20 minutes of the school day to get everybody on board. Now, it's not perfect. It would have been better if they came to school on time. It would have been better if they had two-parent homes who fed them a good breakfast and took them to school on time, but they didn't. And these wonderful educators and administrators intervened within the same minute at the beginning of the day to get these students what they needed. And there was freedom, but freedom within boundaries. Just like, for example, they don't allow corporal punishment, I hope, in your school. They also don't allow grading as punishment because it simply isn't working. The large part of failure and futility and frustration and anger and misbehavior is due to people continuing to use grading as punishment, and it doesn't work. So there's other things that they did, and I'll show you some examples in a moment, like getting rid of the average, getting rid of the 100-point scale, that were the boundaries that administrators set. Teachers still had tons of freedom, but they didn't have the freedom to hit kids, and they didn't have the freedom to have the academic equivalent of corporal punishment, which is failing kids as punishment. So I want to stop talking and listen to you. Tell me what your most successful strategies have been in addressing the needs of your most challenging students. Please use the question function. I'll take about a 1-minute break, and then I'll share your ideas as soon as we return. Thanks, some great ideas coming across here. About 30 more seconds, please. Okay, so let's come back to large group and share some ideas that you and your colleagues have been providing from across the country. Middle school advisory in the morning with opportunities for everybody in the school to succeed. You said reading intervention, and I especially am happy to hear this because that's the sort of thing that we need not only at the elementary school, but I'm hearing more and more that we've got middle and high school students who need to learn how to read, and we rarely have reading certified teachers at those secondary levels, but brother, do we need them. You said one of the strategies I use for my most challenging students is the use of two-step instructions. That is so smart because some instructions and some rubrics are simply overwhelming. Make them simple. You said direct conferences with students. You said we've got incentives to be on time. You said we've got success mentors for our students. You said we're building relationships, and and you said I always use the student lens for checklists. A catch-up period every day. One of them called the catch-up cafe. We use systems, and we have 30 minutes every day for interventions. These are wonderful ideas, and I think you're getting that message from your colleagues that when I ask people around the country what's working well, nobody is talking about a Stalinist 5-year plan. They're always talking about things that work right now and that have an impact for students immediately. So let's take a look at some of the other things that you might want to consider this year. The single best idea I can give you is what I've colloquially called the science fair for adults. It is teacher-to-teacher credibility. It is direct applicability to our students in our schools, and it empowers teachers. Let me illustrate. I have been in situations where they want to improve achievement, and all the usual suspects are brought in. These people are friends of mine, these usual suspects. Robert Marzano, a prince among men, a genius, and Rick Wormley, who does such a great job on grading, and Tom Guskey, the leader in assessment and grading internationally, and modestly I would add myself to those ranks. And you want to know what? Nothing happened until teachers started sharing with teachers what worked in their classroom. The challenge always to externally generated research is, that's interesting, Doug, but it doesn't apply to us. When you do the science fair, you're generating local evidence about what works with your students in your school. And I'm using this science fair terminology quite deliberately because a lot of people overcomplicate this. The science fair, as you can recall from your elementary school days, is just 3 simple panels. On the left-hand side, what was a challenge? In the middle panel, what was my practice? In the right-hand panel, what were my results? So 3 simple panels: challenge, practice, and results. No PowerPoint, no glitter, no dissertations, just 3 simple science fair challenges. And what's really great about this is that you're using systematic comparisons. It's the same grade, the same class, the same teachers, the same assessments. I can compare, for example, if I were to use where we are right now, the fall of the 2018-2019 school year, with the spring of the 2018-2019 year, same kids, same teachers, same curriculum, I could compare that. Or if you prefer, compare the fall of 2018 to the fall of 2017, or the spring of 2019 to the spring of 2018. You decide. But the key is, it's the same kids in the same school with the same teacher in the same assessments. Whenever student achievement goes up, particularly in high poverty schools, the immediate suspicion is, well, it was grade inflation or they must have been cheating. And the way you counter that is to have systematic comparison with the assessments the same. That's not grade inflation, friends. That's work inflation. When you can demonstrate that when the students are working harder because they're responding to the great feedback that you provided them, they're working harder, learning more, performing at higher levels, that's not grade inflation, and it's certainly not cheating. That's just working harder, and as a result, getting better grades. So here are the kind of things that you might codify as results. For example, I think it's easy on things we can control to focus on how do we reduce the DF rate, or expressed in positive terms, what's the percentage of kids with C or higher, or the average GPA, or the percent proficient on performance assessments. Certainly I've seen people do that on mathematics performance assessments, on lab reports in science, on wonderful history projects, as well, of course, as in nonfiction writing in English language arts. But don't stop there. You should also look at behavior, such as the percentage of suspensions and the percentage of non-discretionary office referrals. Because when academic achievement is better, student success is higher, hopelessness is less, and as a result, behavior gets better. And I would look at attendance as well. When kids feel that they have an opportunity for resilience, an opportunity to bounce back, they show up. But if they feel this coming April and May that there's no reason for me to come there because I've already blown this whole year, why even show up? Truancy and tardiness and chronic absenteeism is almost always linked to hopelessness, and that's what you and I must fight at every challenge. Now, I want to be clear. I'm respecting the individual creativity of teachers. For example, when I work in California, the state education code makes clear that teachers have an enormous amount of authority over what students' grades are. So I'm not micromanaging anybody. I'm saying you choose your challenge. You identify what's important to you. Maybe it's failure rate or reading level, writing proficiency. You decide. It's your choice. Then you choose your intervention. I've suggested some, but just pick one. Pick one or maybe two things that resonate with you, that you want to try, and everything else is going to be the same. The only change is your intervention. And then choose your results. Maybe it will be achievement, but maybe you'll choose something else, measurements of attendance, of engagement, of behavior, and so on. It's all up to you. And by the way, it doesn't all have to be numerical. I know some teachers, for example, when they document results, they just want to show how a student's writing has improved, fall, winter, spring, how their mathematical problem solving has become more elaborate, fall, winter, spring. It doesn't always have to be a chart or graph. It just has to show improvement in a way that you find meaningful. Let me share with you some examples. This happens to be a 9-12 school, and to give you a sense of scale, about 1,100 kids with 385 course failures. That was the challenge. What was their intervention? Every Friday morning, if your work is not squared away, you go to the catch-up room. Now, it would have been better if they got the work done, but they didn't. And they weren't going to wait until the end of the semester and have a repetition of 385 failures. And look at the right-hand side. The right-hand side of this simple 3-panel chart showed their results. From 385 failures to 15. Same kids, same teachers, same exams. They increased the electives because they had fewer repeaters. They improved their attendance. They had a 55% reduction in suspensions. This stuff really works. That's not my data, that's their data, remember. Let's look at another one. Here was a 7th grade class that had students who were not explaining story problems. It certainly happened to me teaching 7th grade. And what the teacher did, instead of yelling, "Show your work," was that she modeled complete problem solving and then followed the same student, fall, winter, spring, with incomplete explanations, without clear links in the fall, proceeding through the winter and spring to more complete problem solving. You didn't need a graph. You could just see how the same student's work improved. Here was an elementary example with the 3rd grade class reading far below grade level. They increased from 90 minutes a day, which is what a lot of people think is already a lot because they increased it from 60 to, I'm not exaggerating here, 360 minutes in reading instruction. Heavy emphasis on written response to text. Now, to be sure, I know what you're thinking. Hey, wait a minute. What about the other parts of the curriculum? They read some things about history and about science, but it wasn't just read chapter 3 and weep. It was everything is reading. Everything is comprehension all day long. What were the results? Look at them. 18% of kids were on grade level in September, 38% in January, 72% by May, same kids in the same class. I'm not saying it's perfect, and I know this involves some trade-offs, but all I can say is when you think about kids going into 4th grade, they will not have a prayer in your state science and social studies exams if they can't read the Blumen questions. They won't have a prayer in math problem-solving exams if they don't understand the vocabulary of the questions. So it's reading all the time with a clear emphasis and the courage to say that's the most important thing that we do. Here's another example from 9th grade math. The failure rate was 62%. Huge numbers of kids retaking algebra, sometimes 2 and 3 times. Chronic absenteeism, lots of course repetitions. So what did they do? 2 simple changes. They stopped using the average because they knew that a lot of students have breakthroughs. They fail, 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 and then succeed. They stopped grading homework because the kids simply weren't doing it. They were frustrated. Either they knew how to do the homework, in which case they were bored, or they didn't know how to do the homework, in which case it was a waste of time and immensely frustrating, and focused on doing the practice where it belongs. The best practice happens in class. The best practice athletically happens with a coach present. It happens in algebra with the same coach present that is providing immediate feedback and support. Instead of having homework with no coaching, no feedback, they got the practice done during class. Now, was it perfect? No. But they used to have 62% D's and F's. Now that it had 18% and 82% C or better rate. Not perfect, but pretty darn good with the same students, same curriculum, same exams, same teachers. Here's a middle school social studies teacher. She was remarkably honest and forthright. 120, and she had a huge class load, more than 180 students, and 2/3 of them failing due to missing work. She started doing immediate interventions, including calls home to parents and reminders to students. She went from 120 failures down to 38. Now, she was still apologizing, thinking that's too many. But what an improvement. What a champion this person is. And she was also honest in saying, so when I made these calls, some people said, oh, thank you so much for letting us know. We'll get right on it. Other people hung up on her. Other people cussed her out. I'm not saying it's perfect. I'm just saying it's a big improvement. So let's think about practical solutions that you and I can implement. Here is how we can influence learning. Number one, if you're asking me to teach math to a 7th grader who can't add, subtract, multiply, and divide, I'll do it, but not in one period a day. You want me to teach algebra to a 9th grader who can't add, subtract, multiply, and divide? I'll do it, but not in one period a day. I need intervention, which means that 9th grader might get fewer choices, but that is exactly, interestingly, what happens in some of the world's highest performing schools. Fewer choices now in order to have more choices for a lifetime. Beware of the siren call that says, let a 9th grader have 3 electives. Let them choose because they'll always choose rightly. Yeah, that's because you've got evidence that 15-year-olds always make smart choices. I read a lot, and I haven't seen that evidence yet. If they need more time in literacy and in math, double the time. And explain to me the risk in having overly literate 9th graders, 7th graders who know too much math. Nobody's explained that. Fewer choices today for more choices for a lifetime. Prioritize. Many of you, particularly those of you who are serving high poverty schools, schools with a high number of special education students, high number of students learning English, are inundated by the law of initiative fatigue. My research says if you have more than 6 initiatives, you might as well have none, because none of them become prioritized. You can't focus on more than about 6 initiatives. Efficacy, the bone deep belief that you and I as educators matter. And the way that you inculcate efficacy in your staff is not by bringing in the inspirational speaker to sing the efficacy song and do the efficacy dance. It is rather by saying, what causes student achievement? And when your faculty can tell me when I ask that question that it's about powerful instruction, engagement, respect, relationships, those are things I can control. And when they tell me by contrast, nothing I can do, I'm just a potted plant here, all the influences on student achievement are outside of school, I know we don't have efficacy. Now, to be clear, I acknowledge there are factors you and I don't control. I can't control whether or not kids are awake at 3 o'clock in the morning on their devices. I can't control if parents allow access to alcohol, tobacco, and drugs. There's a lot of stuff I can't control. But I do know this, the heart of efficacy is focusing on the things I can control. And it really is worthwhile making lists of things I can't control or influence, things I can influence, and things that I can control. And then every time I'm together with my colleagues, focus on those things that I can control. Communication that's clear and jargon-free. Brother, are we bad at this in education? Never use, in other words, a 25-cent word if we can think of a $5 word that'll work better. And as a result, we overcomplicate things. I really reject some of the jargon and complexity that is injected into our profession that makes it nearly impossible to communicate with parents, students, and colleagues. And of course, we need to challenge conventional wisdom. So, for example, some conventional wisdom that you and I need to challenge is when somebody says, as they did to me, writing is so 20th century, Doug. I know that you advocated writing for the 90-90-90 schools, but today students don't have to write. They can communicate by making videos. Balderdash, baloney, and other B words. Let me tell you, Stephen Graham is a scholar to read on this, formerly of Vanderbilt, now at Arizona State, has written eloquently and researched deeply about the power of writing. Not only writing on computers, but also writing by hand. It continues to be a key link to improving student achievement. It is, as King said, thinking through the end of a pen. Boys won't read books, I was told this year. They need something more active and only graphic novels. That's not what my friend Roy Reutzel and 8 co-authors found in surveys of thousands of boys that they will read when the work is engaging, is appropriate, and accessible. What boys don't want to do is to look incompetent in front of their friends and peers and teachers. So let them have things that they can read and get better and better and better. Unless you think I'm dumbing things down, those same boys who you say won't read books, they'll learn multi-conditional defenses in basketball. They'll learn 20-step power plays in video games. They will do it, and they'll get feedback and get better and better and better with incremental feedback. That's the kind of way that we need to be able to coach them, provide feedback, and encourage them when they are reading as well. Bless her heart, she's on the honor roll. I'm choosing my pronouns carefully here, friends, because the national data is discouraging. It's our young women, it's our girls who are being told that you can get on the honor roll by being quiet and compliant. The ratio, the data are clear from the New York Times, in National Honor Society is 2-to-1 girls over boys. But the evidence doesn't say that girls are twice as smart as boys or achieving at twice the level. They're slightly higher in English language arts, slightly the same or lower in mathematics and science. This 2-to-1 ratio of grading is about grading for being quiet and compliant, not grading for performance. And the real tragedy of the bless her heart effect is that our young women are matriculating in college 58% to 42% compared to the boys. But 4 years later, the gap is much narrower, meaning that our young women are dropping out more. We put them on the honor roll, we give them this encouragement, and we don't give them the skills that they need to be successful in college. And they get the message from a very early age that all they've got to do is be quiet and compliant to get on the honor roll. And in the schools that I studied, I want you to watch for this, because I looked at students who were on the honor roll but not proficient in literacy and math in 9th and 10th grade. They were overwhelmingly females, and they were overwhelmingly minority young women. And we've got to call ourselves to account about that, because we might be proud about these girls being on the honor roll. We shouldn't if they can't read and do mathematics. And of course, just Google it. We have kids who probably have siblings who cut and pasted their way to the honor roll, but Googling it is nothing more, I tell my students, than a hypothesis. And your obligation when you find something on the web is to find 2 additional sources at least that support that point of view that you started with and oppose that point of view, and then evaluate the credibility. A lot of students can write an essay based on what they found. Much fewer can evaluate alternative sources and use their critical thinking skills to come to a point of view. Finally, we must guard against, in our high poverty schools, fragmentation that is just killing us. When we're fragmented, we lose empathy, we lose efficacy and impact, the evidence that I've brought to bear. We suffer under the weight of initiative fatigue and suffer frayed relationships because everybody's competing for their favorite program. So the question is, where do we focus? The evidence is clear. On high leverage strategies, whether your school has high levels of students in poverty or low levels, the results are the same. Don't ask what works, because nearly anything John Hattie tells us with a pulse can work. Ask what works best. And here are the things that have great impact on student achievement. Nonfiction writing, writing to describe, to persuade, to compare, writing to evaluate. Professional learning communities. And mind you, I mean professional learning communities done deeply. The last article Rick Dufour wrote, he co-wrote with me, called The Futility of PLC Light. That is a free download on our website, The Futility of PLC Light. And Rick and I made the point that a lot of people claim to be doing professional learning communities when in fact it's PLC Light. They get together, they've got the meetings, it's in the schedule, but they're not fundamentally asking the 4 questions of what do we want students to learn? How will we know if they've learned it? What will we do if they don't? What will we do if they already have? They don't have collective ownership of all students, a hallmark of professional learning communities, and they don't have common formative assessments. Please don't say that you're doing PLCs unless you're implementing them deeply, as Rick Dufour envisioned. And finally, of course, effective feedback, feedback that is accurate and specific and timely. That's the sort of feedback that really works. So here is a 2018 update. I've documented the power of focus in studies of more than 2,000 school plans in the United States and Canada, but I've started a new level of analysis that is really revealing some interesting things. It's called Impact Insight, and you can do this at the school or the district level in 3 steps. Number 1, take an initiative inventory. Simply list all of them, and I guarantee you, colleagues, it is longer than you think it is. People will tell me, well, Doug, we've only got 3 or 4. Then I asked the teachers, how about 30? There's always more than you think. Take inventory. Number 2, create implementation rubrics for every initiative. My colleagues, including Lisa Almeida, Brandon Dubeck, and others, are masterful at this, creating 4 levels of implementation. Too often, people evaluate their implementation in a binary way. We're doing Reader's Workshop or we're not. That's just not accurate. There's always a continuum from exemplary implementation to proficient implementation to progressing, close but not quite there, to ineffective implementation. And they all might have spent the same money on the same materials and the same seminars, but there are 4 different levels of implementation. And so when people say that this program or that works or it doesn't work, it may or may not be the program. It's more than likely the level of implementation. In my studies of more than 30 separate programs, implementation was the variable in both behavioral programs and academic programs. And here's the interesting finding from that research. When you think of a graph going levels 1, 2, 3, 4, you might think, as I did, that a little bit better implementation gets a little bit better results. Brother, was I wrong about that? Because level 2 wasn't much better than level 1. Level 3 wasn't much better than level 2. Only at level 4, the deepest level of implementation, did you get significant gains in student achievement. And that's something that really requires careful monitoring that we've done now with schools all over the country. And assess the degree of implementation. Sometimes it's surveys or focus groups or individual interviews. So you can find, according to the rubric that we created, is that initiative really implemented or not? Some other key findings from the 2018 research. Let's say that we find something and we can actually save you money and time. We'll find, for example, as I did, a program, this happened to be a technology curriculum-based program, that the system was spending a per teacher licensing fee for 400 teachers and 4 were actually using it. Now you'd think that if most out-of-towners like me can go to you and say, I'd like to please save you $100,000 or more, save you some time, save you some aggravation by cutting a program nobody is using, people would say thank you. They don't. Every turkey has a champion. Everybody wants to cling to something that they think will work. And it's not the program itself. It's the practices. It's what we do. So how do we think critically about these programs for high poverty schools? Because I'm worried about this, friends. If you're a Title I school, you've got everybody coming out of the woodwork trying to sell you something. And here are the general categories into which these sales pitches apply. Number 1, sympathy. This is all about pandering and guilt and stereotypes. They try to have the illusion of choice, but in fact, if people aren't crying by the end of one of these seminars, then they haven't achieved their objective, but it has nothing to do with improving student achievement. And I worry about these because this is predominant in Title I schools as a way of making people think that they're being understanding of students in poverty, when in fact it is pandering. Number 2, sink or swim. Let's just threaten them. This is the baseball bat, stern figure who's going to discipline people and punish people into compliance. And what they wind up doing, of course, is driving away students who most need to be in school. And thirdly, evidence-based practices. The question to me is not only what would we do if they were our kids, but what would we do if they were rich? What would we do if they were from homes where parents were paying $50,000 in tuition and the student wasn't doing well in reading or math? We wouldn't say, sink or swim, kid. We wouldn't say, well, there. You can't really expect that much of rich kids, can you? We wouldn't say that for a moment. We would move heaven and earth to get them the intervention that they need. We would intervene decisively and immediately. We would intervene every day, not waiting until there's a DNF on the report card, because after all, that's what rich kids deserve, right? Now, my friends, I know I've got an edge to this, but that's because I've spent a lot of my life in high poverty schools, and I'm tired of people thinking that they improve our results with sympathy or pandering or guilt. What we need is evidence-based strategies, as you've heard today, that will really help students and approach them the same way that we would if highly demanding, tuition-paying parents were expecting great things. Now, to the senior leaders and policymakers watching this, we have an historic opportunity to respond to the Every Student Succeeds Act. And shout out, my friends, to Mike Enzi, Senator from Wyoming, in the reddest of red states, who built a bipartisan coalition of Democrats and Republicans. People don't hear about the 100-0 votes that happen in the United States Senate these days, but Senator Enzi has been the quarterback of those, and he's been able to create a system that allows a great deal of relief from the abuses of No Child Left Behind, to focus on causes, not just effects, to show real growth with the same year, the same student, the same teacher, not these crazy multi-year growth programs that nobody understands and does not influence teachers at all. He focuses on pre-K to 12, focuses on student engagement, and of course includes the things that your communities care about. Art and music and drama, physical education, our sports teams, all the extracurricular activities that are invisible when all you look at is reading and math scores, but can be visible if you really respond to the Every Student Succeeds Act with a holistic accountability plan. That's what I've written a great deal about. And by the way, another book that Rick Dufour, Becky Dufour, and I wrote called Responding to the ESSA provides in the appendix exactly how to do this. So I've talked enough. I want to spend a couple of minutes before we adjourn listening to you. Please use the question function, or remember, you can also contact me individually. This number will come to me by voice or by text, and you can get free research, videos, and a number of other resources at creativeleadership.net. And we provide, as you know, keynotes, workshops, coaching all over the world. Now, while I'm looking at your questions, please remember, sign up for the Creative Leadership Seminar in Boston. Now let's take a look at your questions. Start metering. This is a really good one. What are you defining as an initiative? An initiative is a instructional or leadership activity designed to improve student results. Now, when does it stop becoming an initiative? It stops becoming an initiative once it's just part of our culture, part of what we do. For example, one of the hallmarks of 90-90-90 schools is collaborative scoring. And at the beginning, it takes a lot of intentional work. Collaborative scoring is an initiative that we have to monitor and watch. However, after a few years, that's just the way we do things around here. You always take student work to a collaborative team meeting. We always engage in collaborative scoring. That's just part of our culture. But at the beginning, it starts as an initiative. You say, I'm sorry, the last 4 years in our ELA assessment, our average scores have increased dramatically. Oh, thank you for sharing that. The systems, we have systems and commitment to preventing failure. I hope you'll share more of those details with me. I really enjoy learning about those things and would love, of course, to write an article or a book chapter about them. What are your thoughts about having a specific time for reading and writing built into each day? They must be, but I want to be really clear. Reading and writing interventions must happen in addition to the grade level reading and writing and math block. When people pull students out of English language arts to get English language arts intervention, that's not more ELA. That's just the same amount of time. It takes more time. And that is why we've got to be really clear about establishing what the power standards are in other areas and not trying to cover every single thing. We provide opportunities, you said, for teachers to plan together at the PD level. Let me just give a shout out to my friends in Greenfield, Wisconsin. They do professional development right. They used to have around 60% of teachers giving high marks. They now have in excess of 98%. Why? Because when you do professional development in that district, you wind up with a choice of more than 30 things, almost all of which are provided by their own teachers. Now, I've been honored enough to be one of those 35, but I'm not the only one. And when teachers vote with their feet, they have the opportunity to do professional development on the areas that most apply to them. I've particularly had good feedback from special education teachers, from speech pathologists, from others who say they really appreciate having PD that is tailored precisely to their needs. Now, I just want to encourage all of you, a couple of more questions, then I'm going to adjourn. Will the webinar be archived? Yes, it will be at creativeleadership.net. It usually takes a few hours for the system to put the video all together, but we'll make it available. And you said, finally, how is a 100-point scale different than the 4-point scale? Oh, thanks. This is a great way to end, because I will tell you, I just saw, and I'm just going to recognize him publicly, Mr. Dahl, who is a 9th grade teacher who did this 2 weeks ago and blew me away. He's in a very high poverty system, 90% poverty, 90% minority, 90% learning English, and wait till you hear Mr. Dahl's results. He's teaching 9th grade English, I'm sorry, 9th grade algebra, and previously he had more than 40 D's and F's. He went, as your question suggests, to using the 4-point scale. So old-fashioned, A is a 4, B is a 3, C is a 2, D is a 1, F is a 0. So he still had old-fashioned A, B, C, D, F grades. This is not some convoluted new system, just A, B, C, D, F. But what he stopped doing was A is a 90, B is a 80, C is a 70, D is a 60, but F is 0. Because in that system, the 100-point system, the 0 is the death penalty. In a 4-point system, A is a 4, B is a 3, C is a 2, D is a 1, F is a 0. You can get an honest 0, but it's not the death penalty. You can bounce back from it. What were Mr. Dahl's results? He is one of my heroes, because with the same kids, the same high poverty level, same high English language learner level, he went from having more than 40 D's and F's to 0, zip, nada. And to his enormous credit, Mr. Dahl uses the same final exams so he can document this is not grade inflation. This is just kids working harder, becoming more resilient, and using 90-90-90 techniques that really do work. So I want to encourage everybody to continue to stay in touch with me. Sign up for this Leadership Summit. I'd love to get to meet you in person, and come to our town in Boston. It's a lovely place. And remember also that you can contact me directly at the telephone number that you see there, and you can get information directly at creativeleadership.net. Thanks so much for your very kind attention. Look forward to seeing you again at future webinars.